Thank you, Vicki. Thank you. Oh. Save the cheers for Cape Town, but good to see you up and around today on our last day of our cruise to South Africa. And I imagine many of you have been there, but we're really having a wonderful trip from Ghana, Benin, Sao Tome, Angola, Namibia, but the crowning jewel is going to Cape Town, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Of course, everybody has their favorite. Whenever I say Cape Town's the most beautiful, some Brazilian says, no, Rio's the most beautiful. And you can, San Francisco, et cetera. But, where the sea meets the mountains and you have a cosmopolitan city, that's a great experience to visit. And this is actually a view I took from top of Table Mountain. But I'm going to give you let's say, a neighborhood tour of Cape Town and what they call the West Cape, which is the part of South Africa on this Atlantic shore facing south. And of course, there's a big country with many places in all the way up to Pretoria, the capital, up north. But Cape Town they call the mother city because that's where much of the urbanism and the capital and the immigration came to this part of South Africa. Of course, it was not the mother city to the Zulu or the other people in South Africa, but it was mainly a British colony that then became the Republic of South Africa in 1910. But we're coming in here, Table Bay, and then these other bays, False Bay, Walker Bay, and all the way down the coast. And the ship will continue on to Mossel Bay and Port Elizabeth and East London and Richards Bay. So the whole coast of South Africa has many good harbors and population and industry and, of course, a lot of wildlife, much more down in South Africa than in the desert plains of Namibia and the Kalahari. And as you go north, it gets much, much drier and sparse in population and wildlife. But the famous thing about Cape Town and the Cape of Good Hope is the rugged mountainous shore where the mountains come right into the sea, and this made it a famously rough ocean and a hazard to navigation par none, other than maybe Cape Horn off of Patagonia. And so this is one of the sites, Cathedral Rock, where we are not going to get close enough to take this picture, I hope. And the furthermost part of the African continent is actually Point Agulhas, which is a Portuguese name, and then there's this lighthouse on the Cape, which is much further south than even Cape Town. And it's also the dividing line between the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. So this is maybe 100 kilometers down the coast. But this particular part of Africa is famous for rough seas. I talked about it the other day, and you can feel it as you wander around the ship, especially if you're up top on the ship. And it is the convergence of these currents, one coming from the Indian Ocean down, and then the Southern Ocean, which is very cold suddenly, and then all the currents and winds that go up to the coast of Namibia. So this makes for very difficult conditions, and still it's one of the most hazardous places to go in the winter, now we're in the summer, so what I'm going to show you, you don't have to worry about, but you can always come back for the winter experience here. But no cruise ships come by that time. But anyway, they have these swirling currents right off of the tip of South Africa, and then collision of currents, counter-currents, contrary winds, and this is where it builds up such a big broiling sea in the wintertime that it's considered a place to go only if you have to. And of course, big ships think they can just go through it, but there are standing rogue waves, the most anywhere in the world around here. They happen randomly in many places, but here it's almost predictable, and they have a South African satellite to watch the water and give warning to mariners when the waves built up over 30, 40 meters high. And so, again, when I was hiking on the Cape Point, I saw this phenomena, which was not that ship, but what looks like a volcano in the water. And what it is a pinnacle of rock that is barely beneath the surface. So as these big swells of 3 or 4 or 5 meters come up from the Southern Ocean, they kind of break over the subsea rock and create this rather hazardous condition, better seen from afar. And this is also part of the ecology where these seamounts, cliff faces, have upswellings of mineralized water and contrary temperatures. And so this is where there's a great deal of fish life and thereby predators. So this area also has the greatest concentration of great white sharks in the world. And if you're really daring, you can go to Mosul Bay down the coast and go petting sharks, but the fare is a few fingers. But just the seas alone, again in the winter, not this time, will build up so that it's a great hazard to shipping. And every year, one major ship or the other troughs out in a wave, breaks in half, and disappears. So there are a lot of shipwrecks out here, not just along the coast, but out in the supposedly open ocean before they get taken in swallowed by a wave. Fancy a swim? Well, this is again not this time of year, but it did lead to the legend of the Flying Dutchman, made into the opera of the sailors who are lost and they can't survive, and the ship sails on with the ghosts. So that happened off of here in mythology. But when the Portuguese came, Pedro Diaz brought his fleet as they were working their way down the coast of West Africa, and they finally came to Cape Town and Table Mountain, and then they went out and they saw that the coast would turn east and it would turn north, and they went back to Portugal and they reported this. They put in one of their pedrada crosses to mark it, and the king said, well, this is a terrible place, storms and rough water, but you really should call it something more hopeful. So they called it Cap de Bonne Espérance, the Cape of Good Hope, hoping you'll survive your sea voyage here. Now, of course, this part of the world in Africa were well settled for millennia and time immemorial. And the local people, the Kosan, or called San sometimes, who were nomadic herders and agriculturalists, and they lived in the valleys and inland mostly. They were not seafarer or fishing people, but they were greeting the first Portuguese who came and had peaceful relations, providing cattle and helping them set up their camps and such just on the shores of what's now Cape Town. So Jan van Riebeeck in 1652 was the first Dutch explorer who reported it, made treaty of some sort with the San people and started to settle Cape Town. And then came the Dutch traders and then finally the English. But the Dutch built the first fortifications. You see that star fort there, and this is the model in the museum, and had garden plots up the hills, and again, Table Mountain, Signal Mountain. So the rudimentary town was a stopover for transcontinental sailors, particularly around the Cape to go to India and Asia. And so this became primarily a refuge and a trading center. That's why it was called the Tavern of the Seas, because if you could sail all the way from the northern hemisphere down to here, you needed a good drink by the time you got down here. And of course, the town is still that way. And the Dutch fort is still downtown as a park. You can go in it. And there are still remnants of the Dutch housing and windmills and Afrikaan, the distinct version of Dutch spoken by the Dutch descendants in South Africa, is heard everywhere. This is not a major Afrikaan town. It became an English town, and the majority of people speak English along with other languages. The British came in during the Napoleonic era to secure this passage around Africa, and they marched ashore and made a brief battle, and the Dutch surrendered to the British Navy. And then the whole area, including the whole West Cape down the coast and inland, became the Cape Colony, it was called. Now it's called Western Cape. But this was part of the general colonization of much of Africa and the competing European interests. And then they would go from the coast into the inland. And this is where it gets even more dramatic. A a South African writer called Olive Schrader wrote, "If nature here wishes to make a mountain, it makes a range 500 miles long. If a plain, it levels 8 expanses. If a rock, it stands 5,000 feet on its head. And the skies are bluer, higher, and the waves are larger, and the country is greater than any they knew, particularly flat Netherlands." But when the British took over, they had an agreement that they would leave the Afrikaan Dutch to have their farms and have their life, but they didn't want to be under the British rule, and so there was the great trek to the north and east, and this was legendary in South African history, where they, as a group, they decided they'd go get new lands and they would be independent people in their own vast part of Africa. And this led to the Natal Free State, the Orange State. There's still a couple of small areas which are Afrikaan descendants only, and part of the mix of South Africa today. Well, the British didn't take to this. They tried to control the Afrikaners. This led to the Boer War later. And then as part of the general the colonization of South Africa, the British then ran into the Zulu and had this battle at Isilawandi, where the British were surrounded and massacred. So this is the bad blood on the soil of South Africa. But meanwhile, the British influence continued from Cape Colony into Kimberley area, where the diamonds were found, and then up to Transvaal eventually. But the whole point of the British colony was to connect it with all the other ones, going up all the way up to Egypt. Well, it seems like a long time ago, because all those countries are now independent, and the colonial era is a fading memory at this point. Outside of the bay of Table Bay, it's called, is Robben Island, which is a flat island that was used as a prison camp, originally by the British, then by the South African government. And famously, that's where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years in a very small suite. And as we sail into the harbor, now the curious thing is that the harbor faces north. So the sun comes up over the mountain, and then it sets to the southwest at this time of year. So in a way, your visual compass is sort of a bit confused, because you think the sun is going to set in the northwest, but we're in the southern hemisphere, so it's in the southwest. But anyway, the sailors would see the mountains and they knew they were there, because it's much higher than any other hills around. And of course, now they have a business district which is pushing up the profile of the city, but from offshore, it's still quite a spectacular sight. And we'll be going into there's a cruise dock that is near the old harbor, which has been converted from the industrial and shipping business to a large, let's say, public facility with all the old docks and such turned into restaurants and pubs and things. So we can actually, our ship will be right over there. There'll be a shuttle that'll take you to the main entrance to it. And then you can walk into the different parts of the Victoria and Albert Harbor, or Victoria Harbor it's called. And so there's a lot of different things to do that sort of turned what was a sort of an abandoned waterfront in decades ago into a very vibrant center for the city. So I just show you the handout map because there are a lot of places to go, and you walk around. There's marinas and many new things every year. Particularly, they kept the marine signal tower. This is to set your chronometer when you go out to sail. The ball that is dropped at noon. Here's a watchtower that was out on where the original entrance to the harbor was. They still have the dry docks that are still used for some vessels who come in. And then the old customs house across the bridge in one of the canals in the area has been turned into a remarkable art gallery, which is the all African art trading post. And so if you want to get a elephant to take home that doesn't eat much, I recommend one like that. But inside this building, three-story walk-up building, it's just packed with things from all over Africa. So it's sort of like a tour of the whole continent, at least sub-Sahara artworks and things. So again, that's a feature of this particular dock where we are. But like you've already seen, the handicrafts in Africa are remarkable and continue to evolve into modern art. But most of the old warehouses have been turned to shopping and restaurants and excursion boats. And even this, in case you're not seasick enough, you can go up in this. And street performers and bands and all kinds of things happening every day. And then the waterfront pubs and Lord Nelson keeping a firm gaze on the sailors that got loose. And here's a recent statue they put in of Nelson Mandela and then all the other modern presidents of South Africa. As you go out into the area, you find a lot of the old buildings turned into art galleries, some of them painted more than others. And so this is a very colorful part of the city. A lot of the city is expanded into business district, and Table Mountain sort of lords over it. I was told that those buildings were illegally built just because they had such a good view, and the government's trying to take them down because they have a limit, sort of like Washington, D.C. You're not supposed to be higher than the Washington Monument. But there's international banks and commerce, residential districts. And then further down toward the waterfront, there's the governmental center with courthouses and statues to war heroes and monuments of public nature, and the city hall. So this is of the Victorian era of the British colony before it became an independent country. And there are a few of the old hotels and restaurants in town. So you can wander around. It's a very walkable town. And we will be there overnight, so we have plenty of time to enjoy it. They have a lot of these old Dutch-style towns in the center district that have been preserved rather than turning into parking lots. But up the hill, they have an area called District 6, which was for the colored people, meaning not the blacks, but the Indians and other people from around the world. In the apartheid system, everybody had to stay in their own neighborhood. Well, this has become a cafe and art boutique area, and in perhaps response to the apartheid law, they painted all the houses in these fantastic colors. So this is a walking trip from the downtown business district, or you can get a taxi, go up and see it. I mean, it's the remnant of the old town of Cape Town before it got, let's say, built up so much. But there's a lot of new residents. The city itself spreads out in all the valleys far to the north and has a lot of immigration from other parts of South Africa, plus other people from around the world. I have a British friend who has his summer home in England, but he has his winter home down in Cape Town, and so he takes a commute every so often, just as we have. And then there's a lot of modern art and new facilities, particularly the football stadium, which is quite a donut. And it is actually designed by a South African architect after the traditional women's Zulu hat, which just looks like that. We'll see it if if you're on the next trip. The women wear these sort of bonnets that are shaped just like this new football stadium. The other new thing that has happened in the last few years, they've made a big plaza in what used to be a container shipping silo loading dock area, and they took the building with the grain silos and they made it into the Museum of Contemporary African Art and had African curators and African modern art featured in galleries they built right over the concrete grain silos and have a glass top opening, and some of the industrial facilities are still there. But the remarkable thing about it is that they cut out the center of the building and the silos, and then they made this rather fantastic, almost cathedral-like structure with galleries on the side. So I just show you a few pictures. I do recommend going. You can walk in and look at the gallery to go up into the main area. But if you want to go up and see the whole thing, you have a ticket for about $10 US in rand. But it is a surprise of a building that just opened up 2 years ago. So I just show it to you because if you don't go in, it's worth knowing. But up in the galleries, they have African artists. This one represented the geological ages of the African soil, a lot of paintings and photos and even stained glass windows. So it's worth a visit if you're interested in contemporary art. The city, as I said, spreads out. That's the harbor there. That's the point, Cape Point they call it. And then all these different language groups. So it's still, let's say, segregated. Apartheid has ended, but in many ways people either still had stayed in their house. There was no confiscation or displacement of people. I mean, the miracle of South Africa is that it ended the apartheid regime peacefully and legally. And so people have stayed where they were, and the property values are very high around central Cape Town. But you can see the Hossa people have their own neighborhood, and then Afrikaans are in green, so particularly as you go into the farmland north, that's mostly Afrikaans spoken, and then the mixed area. So as you go around town, you'll be struck by the variety of living conditions. So this is a suburb called Langa, where they've been building houses in containers to replace the shanty towns that are the embarrassment to the city, let's say, because there's been a lot of immigration from the rest of South Africa and then illegal immigration from Botswana, Zimbabwe, and even Namibia to come down and look for jobs and a new life down here. A lot of this has been, let's say, improved over time by particularly President Zuma, who built new projects and new houses. So if you go out to the airport, you see all these lines of new townhouses that replace the shanty towns. So they've been trying to design this as quick, modular, inexpensive housing for the majority of the population. If you go to the north of the center city, you go over a ridge, and that's where the University of South Africa is, which was the establishment and bequest of Cecil Rhodes, who you may have heard of as the great industrialist and imperialist of his era, and led the founding of the Cape Colony, and had an ambition to build a railroad from Cairo to Cape Town, which never happened because of the distance primarily. And so he was the great encourager and entrepreneur in South Africa. He started the diamond mines, gold mines, vast tracts of agricultural land. And so he led his investors into all kinds of schemes as made humorous by the Punch magazine. But his legacy is, let's say, not as appreciated by the current people as he wished to have. And he was called by Rudyard Kipling, "The immense and brooding spirit of Rhodes shall quicken and control. Living he was the land, but dead his soul shall be her soul." Well, that's not how most people see it. He was sort of an aggressive imperialist by modern standards, but also he set up the university, and you know the Rhodes Scholars, that's still a bequest of his. He has a building at Oxford and such, so his imprint is still there after 100 or more years. But the students of the university wanted to take down his statue, so they did a few years ago. His last words were, "So little done, so much to do." Well, his spirit lives on in his own memorial right near the university, which has not been desecrated. But his grave is actually up in what was Rhodesia, now Zambia. So he was a man of Africa who died early, I should say. He was 42 when he died. Could have lived on and done more or worse. But I do recommend going to this site, which is, again, past the university, north side of central Cape Town, the Kirchenbosch Botanical Garden. There are endemic and unusual plants in South Africa, in the West Cape area, that only grow here. And so this is let's say, half-hour ride from the dock up into the edge of the mountains, and there is a vast botanical garden set up by Cecil Rhodes himself and open to the public. And you can go in there and see particularly the famous proteus flowers, these big basket-like flowers that are semi-succulent plants, and they bloom all the time, and they're all over the Table Mountain in particular. So you may have seen these in a florist shop, because they're kind of one of the prized flowers that only grows in this part of South Africa. Then there are beaches and bays. I'll just show you a few as you go around. If you have the time, you can go over the mountains to Clifton Beach, Camps Bay. This is just 15 minutes from the dock, I should say. So this dramatic landscape and the sea and the beaches are just available to everybody there. This is a view of False Bay, Simons Bay here, and Muizenberg up here. And again, the road goes right over to downtown Cape Town. So when I was here once with my son Adrian, we went to Muizenberg, which has a very shallow beach and gentle waves, and is sort of a resort place just outside of central Cape Town. And again, it was settled with Dutch and then English, and it was under apartheid that nobody was allowed in to enjoy this beautiful beach. But now it is a surfing center for everyone, and they have cabanas, and a lot of people come here on a hot summer day. And it was just a little town originally. Now it's sort of the Miami Beach resort area of Cape Town, because you can see the water's flat, it's protected from the swells and the trouble out at sea, let's say. But you can go there, as I did with my son Adrian, and give him his first lesson in Polynesian sport of surfing, which of course is a phenomenon around the world. Everybody on paddle boards and surfing, and this is a surf center for South Africa and Cape Town. There are many other beaches down the coast, of course, but some learned by trial and then error. He didn't get hurt, but I still haven't found him. You know, he went out to pet the sharks, maybe. You know, he made it well. And this is the little Simon town on that bay, which has next to what they call the boulders, which is the largest colony of penguins, African penguins that live along the shore. There even some go up to Namibia. And so maybe there's a tour there, or else you can get a taxi, just go there. You're not allowed to go down and play with them, but they're friendly enough. Of course, now, beg your pardon, how do penguins like their cocktails? On the rocks. And what does a penguin waiter say to you? What'll it be? Yeah, these are pretty. And why don't penguins and polar bears get along? They're polar opposites. I don't know, maybe one more. Maybe not. Oh, no, one more. Why are there no penguins in the UK? Because they're afraid of whales. That's a Welsh joke. But anyway, if you want to go further inland, this is a great day excursion into Stellenbosch, which is a Dutch settled farming and now a wine district. So there's a lot of vineyards and restaurants and places, but they have this tremendous big mountain range behind it as sort of the backdrop of the very pleasant little towns with Dutch farmhouses, and particularly they have vineyards up there. So that's where most South African wine you'll get is from this region. So it's very beautiful alpine and even has a bit of snow in the winter. But that's just, again, maybe an hour north of Cape Town. But they also raise these curious birds who are, the closer you get, the prettier they look. But you can watch at the place the hatching of the eggs and the raising and the interpersonal relationships between the birds. They're pretty tough. They fight each other mostly, and then when they don't want to think about it anymore, they put their head in the sand. I described this the other day. They're actually doing this to turn an egg traditionally, or else. Why did the ostrich really hide his head? Because of the other species that have invaded their territory. You can take a ride on one of them. It's even more uncomfortable than a camel. But I'm going to go back to the coast and show you the tip of Cape Point. And you go on Hout Bay. Now that's Table Mountain there, the city right over the dock. The dock's just over the hill there. And then these other mountains and cliffs, but there's a road along that's quite spectacular. Once you leave the area where they have condos and housing, and there's an oil rig that was on its way to Namibia. But again, you face the rough ocean, so you can't go to a beach down here. But this Chapman Drive goes cut into the mountain to get around to the Cape Point, which is not inhabited. This is an old Dutch house there that's been preserved as a part of the signal tower for the old navigation. But this is the very tip of Cape Hope, and has this incredibly rugged cliff face mountain into the sea. And you can go up there to the observatory and look over it, or go down into the shore and see the designation of what is the final tip of Africa, with the Diaz Pedrada up high. And so this is, again, maybe an hour-long excursion out of the central city for this dramatic look at the ocean, overlooking the sea and the further rugged coast of South Africa. So this is about as spectacular a scenery as you can find. But again, the water is so rough, you can see the kind of explosive power of the Southern Ocean battering on these rocks here. So I would not recommend going for a swim here. But somehow the seals enjoy it. I guess they're tired of the pool, or they're afraid of penguins. I'm not sure. But it's a beautiful place with this rolling ocean. But the other thing to do is to go up to Table Mountain. So I'll show you just a bit of the incredible height. There's a funicular cable car that goes down to a station that's above the city. You can hike it. It takes all day, and you better bring some water or champagne to make it, because you go up at about 2,500 meters, and that's the station you get out of. And then the mountaintop is flat with trails around it, so you can go see views of the ocean or the city or the clouds, depending on the weather. They say if there's clouds on one side of the mountain or the other, it's a weather indicator. You can predict the weather by the clouds hanging on one side of the mountain or the other because of the wind changing. But it's pretty rugged. They try not to get people lost up there, because when the fog comes in, it's very disorienting. You don't know where you are. So pick a day when it's sunny like this, and then you get to see the wild proteus flowers and succulents and many other plants that grow up at that level, some that don't grow any lower. But of course, it's a dangerous place if you back up far enough for a selfie. I don't know where they went. Suddenly they weren't there. But anyway, it's a spectacular sight and sort of the main attraction for hikers, especially in South Africa. But it's rather dizzying. I mean, this is a look from the overlook down into the town. So this place is remarkable, and one of the most beautiful cities and seascapes in the world. And so I'm going to leave you with a little ode to South Africa that I wrote. The Rainbow Nation, a test for the future of humanity, a rugged, beautiful land that has been watered with blood and the tears of the oppressed. Yet South Africa is still beautiful, bountiful, and forgiving, even as human passions unleashed over the land clashed, even though there is plenty enough for all. And greed and righteousness have yielded the bastard of injustice long enough. Somehow, as if in a patience beyond any person, peace has now prevailed over history. A lovely, fragile quilt of cultures has been stitched together. An array of relief and good cheer has spread across the land, which Mandela calmed by his own patience. Life is still not fair, and many troubles abound. Yet the worst is past and the best is now becoming. With that, I welcome you to South Africa and leave you with this saying of Disraeli: I saw more than I remember and remember more than I saw. Have a great trip, and it's been wonderful to be with you on this beautiful ship, and bon voyage. Thank you. Thank you.